No bidding yet, no bidding. Thank you so much. I cannot begin to tell you how humbled and honored I am to take lead of this amazing organization over the course of the next 12 months. I think I'd be remiss, though, if I personally didn't thank Marnie Lambert for her service to this organization. Marnie was a fantastic president, and she did an amazing job as a cleanup hitter on so many of these important issues. I think we all owe her another big round of applause. Thank you, Marnie. I hold no illusions with respect to what we are up against over the course of the next 12 months. When you think about the financial resources of the securities industry, it truly is stunning how wealthy they are and the reach and the power that this industry has. What's interesting to us is all of the bad activity that brokerage firms have engaged in over the course of the last 17 years. A very wise man once said, it's impossible to get a person to understand something when his or her salary depends upon them not understanding it. And I think that's the phenomenon that we see in the securities industry. And I think that's why the securities industry has engaged in so much chicanery in the last 17 years alone. Think about the activity we saw leading up to the Great Recession. Just think about some of this activity. We saw market timing. We saw late trading. We saw brokerage firm research departments publicly telling investors, mom and pop investors, that this investment is a strong buy, when in fact privately they were referring to these securities as pieces of garbage, as pieces of junk, or in Merrill Lynch's case, POSs. We saw brokerage firms and banks bundling together millions of toxic mortgages, selling them to mom and pop investors across the country and calling these things safe and secure investments, when in fact they were anything but. Then we had the Great Recession, and we had heard from these brokerage firm executives for the better part of 2 decades telling us about rugged capitalism, standing on your own feet. Regulators, stand down. Let us do what we do, and we'll do it in an honest and ethical manner. Well, then they get caught with their hand in the cookie jar. They come hand in hand to the American taxpayer and Congress, and they don't ask, they demand for an $800 billion taxpayer finance bailout, and they get it. Now, you would think after that they'd change their way, right? Like Saul on the road to Damascus, they would see the light. They would get on their hands and knees and they would beg regulators and the American public and Congress to give them a second chance. But in reality, they engaged in the same sort of activity that brought us to the precipice of the Second Great Depression, even after '08. We've seen banks and brokerage firms engaging in drug laundering for Mexican drug cartels. We saw with Wells Fargo, thousands of Wells Fargo employees creating 3.5 million bogus accounts. We saw banks and brokerage firms manipulating the benchmark LIBOR index that every single person in this room who has a bank account, a mortgage, or anything related to a financial institution was defrauded by. And even today, we see banks and brokerage firms attempting to gut the Volcker Rule, eviscerate all of the protections set up post-2008, peeling back the fiduciary duty. The activity is absolutely stunning. Ladies and gentlemen, the securities industry lost its way. And it lost its way when these companies became publicly traded companies. Goldman Sachs wasn't always the massive blood-sucking squid that Vanity Fair once called it. It was a partnership, and partners care about their reputation because they are unlimitedly liable to the extent something goes wrong. They become a publicly traded company in 1999, and the corrupting influence of other people's money comes into effect. Taking other people's money turned these conservative banks into global casinos that put ethics below everything else and made the search for the almighty dollar the #1 prospect. Think about Stanley O'Neill of Merrill Lynch. He saddled the company with $10 billion of investment losses, and yet he walked away with a $151 million pay package. Could you imagine if you could go to Las Vegas with somebody else's money, 10 million bucks, and if you're wrong, you still walk away with a couple million bucks, but if you're right, you walk away with 25% of the gains. It's a corrupting influence. These firms' balance sheets were leveraged 30 to 1. The valuation of these securities drops 3%, and these firms say, gee, we had no idea our entire equity could be wiped out. And yet not a single Wall Street executive went to prison. Think about that. In the savings and loan crisis in the early 1980s, 1,000 bankers, S&L bankers, went to prison. How many crises have we seen in the savings and loan industry since then? Zero. After the 2000 to 2002 market crash, the senior executives of Enron, WorldCom, and HealthSouth all went to prison in excess of a decade. How many accounting scandals have we seen in Fortune 500 companies since then? Zero. It's amazing when you think about the chicanery they engaged in. When I think of the securities industry, I think of mayhem from the Allstate commercial. You've all seen those commercials on baseball and football games where anything mayhem touches turns to garbage. It turns to rust, the reverse Midas touch. That's the securities industry. And the reason why it's so important is because we face a massive retirement crisis in this country. There's a $10 trillion gap between what we have and what we need to retire. 1/3 of all Americans haven't saved a penny for their retirement. The average 401k balance is a paltry $90,000. And all of that is what brings us to PIABA. I cannot begin to tell you the meaning that PIABA has had in my career. I look back at any success I've had in this industry, in this career, and I can really attribute it to PIABA. Because I was able to download a massive sum of information from other lawyers in this room who've been doing this for far longer than I have. And I was able to take that information to successfully prosecute cases. I was able to get pre-hearing briefs, post-hearing briefs, cross-examinations, direct examinations, everything I needed to successfully prosecute these cases on behalf of my clients is because of PIABA. I remember in the summer of 1997, I had just finished my first year of law school. And I learned about PIABA. And I called PIABA, and I spoke to someone by the name of Robin Ringo. And I said to Robin, I said, my name is Andrew Stoltmann. I said, I'm a first-year law student, and I said, I want to join PIABA. I said, I used to work as a broker, and now I want to sue all the crooked guys that I used to work with. And she said, with that tone of hers, she said, well, Andrew, she said, I don't know if we can do that because you're a law student. But she said, let me check with the board of directors, and let's see what I can do. And they made an exception for me. I was the first student member of PIABA, and I still appreciate it to this day. I remember sitting in October of 1999 in the Palm Desert Marriott in a room just like this and looking around at all of the amazing talent in the room, never thinking that one day I might be asked to lead this amazing organization. It's such a privilege to serve all of you. But we have issues, and we have very important issues to work on over the course of the next 12 months. And I want this speech to serve as a declaration of war on the securities industry. You know, fat cat bankers and Gilded Age robber barons have run this country for far too long. And the reason why this is so important right now is because we are at a tipping point. We are at an inflection point. We are at the single most important period of time for investors in the last 30+ years. Because every single protection put in place post the 2008 recession is now in jeopardy. It's now in peril. So we have important issues to work on. And the most important issue, in my opinion, is the unpaid arbitration pot. It is unconscionable that FINRA hasn't created an unpaid arbitration pot. The GAO flagged it in 2000 as a major issue and a major concern. We know, ballpark, approximately 25% of all arbitration awards go unpaid in any given year. And the amazing thing about it is it would be so easy to rectify this problem. You could impose a $100 surcharge on brokers. 600,000 brokers in the country, it wipes the problem out. If the securities industry says, wait a minute, that's unfair. Why should the good brokers subsidize the bad brokers? Last year, FINRA brought in $185 million in fine money. Take 60 million of that money and set up an unpaid arbitration pot, especially for a nonprofit organization. We also need to work on that definition of who can or cannot be an arbitrator. Right now, FINRA requires arbitrators to have 5 years of work experience and 2 years of college experience. And that is limiting. That literally prevents millions of eminently qualified individuals from being FINRA arbitrators. You're trying to tell me that a veteran who served his country and was willing to pay the ultimate price for his country, but he only has a high school education, isn't qualified to be a FINRA arbitrator? This guy can decide, or this woman can decide, a capital murder case, an antitrust case, but they can't determine whether Merrill Lynch was negligent in not supervising a broker when he steals a bunch of money? We have to work on the fiduciary duty rule. The fiduciary duty rule, the DOL, is fantastic. And the fear is the SEC is going to attempt to water this thing down, somehow bastardize it, somehow make it weaker than what we already have. And we simply can't have that, given the retirement crisis that we currently have. We have to work on this expungement issue. It remains a major issue. We have a law firm right here in the Denver area that's soliciting these brokers going back 10, 15, 20 years to wipe their entire CRD clean, and they're successful at it. You have mom and pop investor pulling up the CRD, looking at their background of their brokers, doing everything they're supposed to do. They're seeing everything is clear, and they walk right into the arms of a financial predator who may have 10, 15, 20 complaints expunged. We also have to work on these non-attorney representatives, because our clients get defrauded once, and then these non-attorney representatives, they'll take them for $25,000 up front on a small case. They're not bound by any ethical guidelines like lawyers are, and they're a real menace. And I look forward to working with FINRA on this issue. But everything I do as president is truly because of the progress made by past presidents. There's a saying that if I can see for miles, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I want to thank the past presidents who have pushed this ball forward in order so I can hopefully make progress on these important issues. I want to thank past presidents like Bob Banks, Diane Nygaard, Scott Ilgenfritz, Joe Pfeiffer, Hugh Berkson, Marnie Lambert, Jason Doss, and so many others. I also want to thank the members who aren't here. You know, I look across this room, and there's so many faces that I've seen for the 17, 18 years I've been a member of this amazing organization. But there are also so many faces I don't see. And it's sad. Some real giants in this industry. People like Boyd Page, Jim Beckley, Tom Hargett, Brian Biggins, Pat Sadler, and so many others. I also want to thank the volunteers of this organization, because ultimately this is a service organization, and the progress gets made because of the volunteers at the committee level, and they deserve so much credit. I want to thank strong state securities regulators like Joe Borg and Tanya Soloff and so many others. I look forward to working with you over the course of the next year. I want to thank the attorneys in my office, Joe, Alex, Deanna, and Michael, because while I'm playing PIABA president, someone has to hold down the fort and handle these cases. I also want to thank Marta for our time together, because while I'm playing PIABA president, someone has to hold the home fort down, and I appreciate all your love and respect. Last, but certainly not least, I want to thank Robin Ringo, and I'll tell you something. There is not a fiercer warrior for investor rights than Robin Ringo, and I think there are times, including myself, where this organization takes advantage of her, or at least doesn't fully appreciate the full scope of what she does. She has done an amazing job. She's given her blood, sweat, and tears. I think we owe her a big, big, big round of applause, and all the PIABA staff. In closing, that's the most popular words for you Yankee fans out there who want to get out and see the game. In closing, I'm reminded of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who in August of 1963, before one of the most important speeches in this country's history, reminded America of the fierce urgency of now. And we face that fierce urgency of now with respect to investor rights, because it is, as I said, the most important time for investors ever. It's not the number of servants you have, but it's the number of people you serve that truly counts. So I want this speech to also stand for a request, a demand, a plea to volunteer your time, to volunteer your efforts, to volunteer your money, to write for the PIABA Bar Journal, to come to the annual meeting, to come to Hill Day, to help people with arbitrators, help the student members out. Do everything possible to help your fellow PIABA member to make this organization even greater than what it already is. And I certainly can't promise you that I'll be the best president this organization has ever had, but I can promise you that nobody is going to work harder for the investor rights and this organization than me. In the words of Bruce Buffer, it's time. Thank you. Yeah.